Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to today's webinar, Publishing Best Practices. My name is Felicia, and I will be running everything in the background for our session today. We're excited to welcome our stellar panel for today's discussion, and we're excited that you all have joined us today as well. As I said, my name is Felicia. I work here for Make Music and for Alfred, and I'm going to introduce to you all of our presenters for today. As I introduce them, I'll have them go ahead and turn their cameras on. And once we've got everyone on screen, then we'll go ahead and start the discussion for today. First off, we're joined today by three music publishing masters. Combined, they have been published several hundred times by many different companies. They've taught across all age levels, and they bring a wealth of publishing insider knowledge to our discussion today. I'm happy to introduce Tyler Arcari, Instrumental Music Editor for Excelsior Music Publishing, Chris Bernotas, Director of Instrumental School Methods and Repertoire at Alfred Music, and Andy Glover, President of CL Barnhouse Company. Next up, we have two composers on our panel who have experience writing for music for school children, for marching bands, for Broadway professionals, and everything in between. Please welcome Carol Brittin Chambers, composer and owner at Aspenwood Music, LLC, and Jason Loffredo, composer, arranger, orchestrator, and copyist. And finally, I'm happy to introduce our conductor for today's panel, who brings years of teaching, directing, and programming experience across all age levels to today's conversation. This is Dr. David Kish, Director of Bands and Professor of Music at the Metropolitan State University of Denver. Thank you all so much for being with us and for speaking with us today. I'm going to go ahead and get things started just with an introductory question. So I'm going to go around the room, kind of in at least the room on my screen, and ask all of you to tell us what is your role in the world of music right now, and how did you find your way to your current position? So Tyler, I'm going to start us off with you, if you don't mind.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tyler Arcari. I currently work for Excelsior Music Publishing, which also encompasses Wingert Jones Publications, RBC Music, and now Conductor Music Publishing. I don't know what everybody else's story is, but I happened upon mine out of pure luck. I was a teacher in Alabama for a few years, teaching middle school and high school. I happened to enjoy writing music, and I also happened to know a lot of people who were already involved in this field. My mentors at Troy University were Ralph Ford and one of our current composers, David Samuel, and they kind of taught me as much as I think I needed to know to get my foot through the door. And that's how I did it. I ended up getting some pieces published through Carl Fisher. And then after a few years of teaching, I was contacted for this new venture, and that's how I ended up here.
All right, thank you, Tyler. Chris, you're next up on my list.
Sure. So my name is Chris Bernotas, and I taught here in New Jersey for 28 years, 25 of which at the same high school. Same thing, all levels, all abilities, and just loved every minute of teaching. I didn't leave teaching as an angry, burnt out teacher. I just happened to also write music, which was inspired by teaching my students. So it's kind of a natural outgrowth of, I have a concept. Oh, I don't have any music that teaches this concept. And I just did a great lesson on it. I guess I'll write a piece. And that wound up being my story of getting involved in the publishing world. It was the first piece I sent in. I could talk about this later, but I put a package together. This is back when you used to send mail, with paper and stamps and stuff. I sent it in the mail, and I actually had the piece accepted, and that started my relationship with Alfred and several other publishers throughout my teaching career. So I had this dual career happening, teaching and then writing, and I eventually wound up balancing life by now continuing in the world of music publication. So I oversee the Alfred Concert Band, Bellman Concert Band, Highland Etling Orchestra, method books, and all kinds of fun stuff here at Alfred.
All right, thank you, Chris. It just so happens that all three of the editors were in line in my list. So Andy, you're up next.
All right. My name is Andy Glover. I'm with CL Barnhouse Company, which is a long-standing American music publisher. We've been in business since 1886. We also serve as a distributor for many other companies, including Dan Publications, William Allen Music, RWS Music Company, Claude T. Smith Publications, and others. I've been at Barnhouse for 24 years. I'm currently the president of the company. I am involved in the editorial process here, as well as helping to manage the business. I got here kind of by accident. The short version was I was unemployed and I needed a job, but I had a little bit of experience in a lot of areas. I had some experience in composing and arranging. I'd had some things published. I'd taught for a number of years. I had worked as a professional performing musician, and I'd had some business experience. And the Barnhouse people were looking for somebody to come into the business to perhaps help lead the company into the next generation. So that's my story.
Kind of the perfect storm of abilities. All right, so let's move now. Carol, tell us about you.
Hello, everyone. My name's Carol Brittin Chambers, and I would say now my music role, I feel lucky that I would call myself a full-time composer and arranger now. But I also teach. I've taught for 20 years at Texas Lutheran University here also. But my background getting here, it's very just like everybody else in this room. I started out, I had my undergrad was music education degree, and I knew I wanted to be a band director. But I was really serious about performance too. I had done piano my whole life, but then I became a trumpet player. So my master's degree is in trumpet performance from Northwestern up there in Chicago. I wanted to study with the Chicago symphony players. But my first job, I guess, was a band director, and that's actually where I first started writing. And it was kind of out of necessity. I started writing competitive marching band shows for the bands where I was teaching, and then that kind of blew up. And I started getting a lot of clients, and that's actually why I created my company, Aspenwood Music, was really to showcase my marching shows at first. And then after I wasn't a band director anymore and I started teaching more on the college level, that's when I started devoting more time to getting concert works written. And my first ones also were through Carl Fisher. We can talk about this later too, but I jokingly would sort of follow around some of them, at the different conventions, go to the booths and stuff. And so I would go up to him and, how do you do this? And, and so I just, after a while, I pestered them enough, I guess. They were like, well, you just send me some music. And anyway, now I feel blessed to be published through other companies as well, like Excelsia and a variety of others. So.
All right, thank you, Carol. Jason, how about you?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Loffredo. For many of the Finale users out there, you may recognize the voice from the Conquering Finale series. This is what my face actually looks like. I have a degree in music education from Syracuse University, and then never really taught music after that, which was kind of strange. I went right into theater. It was kind of what I was interested in, and kind of moved to New York and tried to do the whole theater thing. So I, subbed on Broadway a lot, played a lot of Broadway, a lot of off-Broadway stuff, dabbled in composing, dabbled in arranging, dabbled in orchestration. Then in the last 5 or 6 years, I've definitely done a lot more copying, more so on the commercial side of things, like musicals and film scoring and that sort of stuff. A little bit in the publishing world, but very small, small chunks on very specific projects. So I do get the publishing a little bit, but I'm more on the commercial side of that stuff. But yeah, I'm here, and now most recently things have sort of come full circle, and I'm just started teaching one course at NYU. So I'm back in academia, which is interesting and exciting or something. But yeah, so that's my story. I guess I'm the Finale expert-ish of the group, probably, I think. So it's good to be here. It'll be great to hear from all the other publishers and composers out there, like how they're using Finale and all that stuff. So I'm kind of interested in that today. So anyway, that's me.
All right, thank you. And then last but not least, David.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Kish, and I started my career teaching middle school band. And if I if I ever changed careers, I would go back to teaching middle school in a heartbeat. I loved it. I went and got a few graduate degrees and was hired at the University of Georgia. Spent a few years there and then moved to Denver in 2005 to teach at MSU Denver, a school of about 20,000 students right in downtown. About 7 years ago, I was appointed the conductor of the Colorado Wind Ensemble, which is a wonderful group here, semi-professional group right here in Denver. And I'm actually on sabbatical this semester working on an edition of a march, and it'll be hopefully my first publication. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot from all the folks here in the room. So.
All right, thank you all so much for being with us and for speaking with us today. What I think we're going to do is I'm going to kind of talk us through the life cycle of a piece of music. So we'll start with the composition, how you guys create your ideas, how you take it to the page, and then we'll go to the editors, where the music goes next, how does it become a published piece, and then finally we'll end up on stage with the conductor and the performers. How do you select from the published pieces to put that out in front of your musicians? So Jason and Carol, if you would tell us a little bit about your process for creating a piece of music, whether you are creating a brand new composition from scratch, you're arranging a pre-existing composition. Once you have that idea, how do you take that idea and put it onto the page? And once it's there, how do you make sure that it's ready, whether you're going to submit it to a publisher or directly to a performer? How do you make sure that you're ready for it to go to that next step? So I'll leave it, Jason or Carol, whoever would like to jump in on that.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll take the bait. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it changes depending on the context. I think, and also the source of what I'm doing. Like if I'm generating something from scratch, I'm the type of person, I prefer to kind of sketch ideas on the piano and then write directly into Finale. So that's sort of my process. I know a lot of people still like to write by hand and then do that thing. So for me, I'm usually in Finale rather quickly. It helps that I know the program really well, I think. So, but my steps from there is, I always talk about templates in Finale being one of the most important things that we can do as users of Finale. And so I'll always start with a template, start with what I need to have, the instrumentation. It's got all my settings in terms of the way that I want things to look, the fonts that I want to use, all that stuff, so that I don't have to deal with that stuff later. And I think that's really important. And I'm sure this is what all the panelists and especially the publishers do. They have their own templates and they go from there. But yeah, so there I put the music in, I edit it, I do what I need to do. And then with that template, it makes it really easy to have a finished product. So the back end of the process is actually really quick for me because things are kind of set up the way that they're supposed to at the beginning before I even get started. So for me, finishing a project, whether it's, just a simple piano vocal arrangement, or if it's like a Broadway orchestration of something, I put the notes in and it takes me a couple hours or something to kind of format the parts and get it ready to print. And so yes, that's sort of my process. I like to think about making sure that the template is solid first before I get into it. Yeah, I think that answers the question, right?
Yeah, quick follow-up then. So talking about the templates, is that something that you will set up for every piece, or do you have like one style of template that you use for all of your pieces that are going to a Broadway musical, or all of your pieces that are going to a commercial film score?
That's actually a great question. I'm glad that you asked. I do actually teach a Finale template workshop, and this is one of the things I talk about, where I actually have what I call my master template, which is going to have all of my basic settings, like things that I want to do with the staff line thickness and certain spacing of certain elements. And then from there, I'll create sort of sub templates for the project. So if I'm working on a musical and it has this instrumentation, I'll set up a project that has a template that has that instrumentation, and all of those parts, all those linked parts are in some ways pre-formatted to a degree. So that, and also the titles, like the show title will be, the same, the credits for the composer, the lyricist, all that stuff will be kind of in place before I get going. So yeah, I do have sort of a master template, which is a generic kind of these are the settings that I like. And then as I go on specific shows or whatever the project is, I do have my project specific template.
And then Carol, what about you? Is that a pretty similar process on your end when you're doing maybe your marching band shows?
Yeah. Well, for marching or concert, yeah, some similarities. I like to go play on the big, nice piano sometimes because to me, that just sort of promotes creativity sometimes, just because in terms of harmonies and stuff like that, for sure. Often though, let me just back up and say, when I'm starting out to write a piece, a lot of what it's going to be depends on the commission. And so some of that is decided between me and the person who commissioned it. I always start out with grade level in mind, even if something like that changes maybe a little. Maybe I thought it was going to be a 1 and we decided, okay, let's make it go to a 1.5 or something. But I always think about grade level, again, because that's what the person commissioning it wants. And that's really going to affect what melodies I come up with, because, you know, for the lower grade levels, they can't have so many leaps. Or I have to think about not only maybe what the main melody is, what key am I going to put it in? Because if it's going to be for clarinets, young clarinets, we don't want them going back and forth over the break, or different things, or trumpets, you know, their range, we got to be sensitive to things like that, all kinds of things. So for me, you know, what grade level, what key I'm going to put it in, and so on. But often I'm very melody driven and I'm a hummer. So often when I start really writing the pieces, I'm not even at my computer. I'm usually driving around, or I'm out taking a walk or something, and some little melody is presenting itself, and I can't get that out of my head. And so I usually take out my phone and I record and I start humming into my voice memos, or when I wake up in the middle of the night because I've got a project in my mind, I can't get stuff out of my mind. I'm like, I don't want to forget this. I'll go sneak into the other room so I don't wake up my family. Try to, you know, get them some things down because I don't want to lose those ideas from my brain. But yeah, but I also get to finale pretty quickly. So my synth right here, and I prefer Hyperscribe. To me, that's the most efficient way. Because once I know, okay, it's gonna be this melody, I can just play it real quickly into the like trumpet line or into the low brass line or whatever it's gonna be. And I usually do the playback and click doesn't work as well for me. For me, it's like where I keep the metronome, and I love that feature because I can go as fast as I want. If it's some whole notes and half notes, you know, it's just pretty efficient for me anyway. And same thing, yeah, templates. Definitely, I've got my templates set up. Some of that has to do with, well, you know, feedback early on that I used to get years ago from publishers. You know, hey, go ahead and use this template because then we don't have to do so much if you send it to us and we take it. But also for me, it's like percussion sounds and things like that, because again, connected to my synth, there are certain percussion maps, whether it might be for marching like VD Light or something, or it might be for concert. I'll even put in some hidden, what I call hidden staves. So you don't see them printed on the score. But again, maybe there are more or better ways to do it. I don't know. It's just the way I've been doing it forever. But that's where I know where they are on my keyboard, where the suspended cymbal roll is, or the maraca, or the whatever. And again, I can just play those in a lot faster. And so sometimes I'll put extra staves just for playback, so you can hear what it's going to sound like, but you don't actually see that I actually put the tempo blocks on the percussion tube printed somewhere else. Yeah, but I think, does that answer too?
I think it definitely does.
Great.
We had a couple of people asking about templates and sub-templates, and there's one person, Randy, who had a question. He says, do you mean that the main template has all the instrumentation you might have available, and the sub-template only uses the instrumentation for a particular section, movement, etc.? I think, Jason, that's directed at you.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I do it is my main template, the instrumentation is not really all that important. I just have a several instruments that are just kind of set up just to be there. Maybe like 2 or 3 from each family of instruments. The more of the point is that the other settings, like the spacing settings, the line thicknesses, all that stuff is kind of ingrained in that document. And then from there, I'll take that document and create another template for whatever project I'm working on. And that's where I'll specify where the instrumentation is. I think that's what I meant. Yeah.
And then Carol, I think there's also a follow-up question for you from Eric. He was asking, this might actually be a publisher one too, but he says, do publishers typically require composers to submit their music using a specific template setting. You mentioned that some had sent you templates. And then they said, or if it is accepted by a publisher, would you then have to re-engrave the entire piece?
I think, Tyler, Chris, Andrew would better. My experience is it doesn't have to be, but if you start doing some stuff on a more regular basis, it helps them later if they don't have to go reformat lots of things. But certainly if you've got something, and I'll let Tyler or somebody else answer that, because you guys are the ones really looking at that.
So I think a really good thing to understand is that every publisher out in the world, especially ones that have been around for a long time or have just, kind of developed their own thing, we don't really talk to each other other than like here. It's like, hey, Chris. But we all have our own intricacies, and I think one of the things, I can only speak for what we do here, and we do not require anyone to use our templates. However, we use our templates. So once something is accepted, we will then transfer that over into our template. And then, yes, if it wasn't, everything gets re-engraved because we have our own house style. And, one of the things about publishing out to the masses for, educational setting like what we focus on here is consistency is key. It's key in teaching. It's also key in what your company looks like, how your music functions, what your templates mean. They usually correspond to grade levels. So we want a band director or a choir director, orchestra director, jazz band director to always grab, if they get a grade 1 from us, it will always be the same. There's no surprises. And so another thing, I will very often give a composer my template and say, here's the grade 2 template if you're going to write a grade 2, because it has the instrumentation that we're looking for, which is not the same across all publishers. So and yes, we all also have guidelines that correspond to those templates too for that same purpose. I think that answered it. So
I want to jump in on that too, because this is all, I think each one of us is like a mixture of a bunch of different backgrounds. As a band director and then writing for my kids, the first piece that I wrote, concert band, I did a ton of drum corps arranging and marching band stuff. But when I actually, that was mostly because that's where people were asking for stuff to be written. There's a great field for that. But when it came down to like concert writing, my first piece didn't even really have staff names. They had kids' names. The mallet part was Julia. That's the kind, there was no oboe part. There was no bassoon part. I had a tenor sax part, so it's very specific. And a lot of the content that we acquire, and that's kind of what we do, is we're talent agents in a sense. We're searching for great content. So that's key. And I'm old enough that I started with paper and pen and a bad piano and a Sony Walkman with the bass boost that didn't have I didn't have a slow down feature or anything like that. But then Music Pros, actually, if anybody knows Music Pros, I had like 18 discs into my computer, transitioned, and I'm very thankful for it, from writing by hand into Music Pros, eventually into Finale. My workflow in Finale is very fast. But when you're talking about from a publishing side, when I'm looking at music as a submission, I think it's really the biggest advice I can give you is look at music that we have published and that Tyler and Andy have published. Look at the pieces that your piece might fit into. It doesn't have to be in a template. It's nice if it matches the orchestration. I think that's important. I think it's very important that you check the guidelines and match that to a degree, but we all put it in our own templates. And it's a little bit interesting as far as the sharing versus not sharing of templates. Our templates in particular they're proprietary. They represent many, many years of people's work. So you kind of don't really just put them out there, or at least we don't. But so if it helps, it does help. But the thing I'm mentioning about being handwritten, I also wouldn't turn down looking at a piece of music if you write it by hand. Because it's the content first, and then the presentation of that content is what follows. So I wouldn't want the tool to be hindering the creative process or what you're creating. But I will also say this before passing it back. Looks do count. It really does make it helpful when what I'm seeing is clear and it's easy to read, because the student's going to read it, a director's going to read it. Is this going to make a hand go up in rehearsal? is this going to be something that we have to spend, 3 weeks, sifting through to find mistakes? So presentation does matter, but content is key.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Chris just said. For us at Barnhouse, the medium is not the message. We're a lot more interested in the content. I mean, if we think this is a writer with some skills and talent, if we think this is a piece that we can do some good with, we're going to find a way to make it fit one of our series or one of our templates. And so it doesn't really matter to us what it looks like coming in. It's what the piece is all about. And if it's something we can be successful with is the most important thing.
So then with all of that said, let's talk about the editorial process. So what's the process for a new composer? How do they submit music to each of your individual companies? And what happens to that piece of music, whether it's selected or not? Andy, since you were just on, why don't we go with you?
All right. Well, composers submit music to us through our website. We have a link that's on our barnhouse.com website. There's a page devoted to editorial and music submissions, which explains what we're looking for and what we want people to send to us. And so they submit things to us. We get a lot of submissions every year. It's in the hundreds. I'm going to say 400 or 500 a year, something like that. There are 3 people that review submissions here. We all review all submissions. It's a time-consuming process, obviously, because it just takes time to go through that many tunes. And we're looking for the ideal submission for Barnhouse would fill a number of boxes for us. We are a for-profit publisher, so anything that we accept for publication, we have to have some reasonable expectation that we're going to be successful with this piece and that we're going to take in more than we're going to spend in terms of the production and marketing of this piece of music. But beyond that, in no real particular order, we're looking for things that have a teachable or programmatic purpose, something that a teacher can use in the classroom that's going to help their students go from one level to another in terms of some aspect of music. And it's important, but not a deal breaker, that students would enjoy working on this piece of music. That's always a plus factor. Teachers are always looking for ways to keep kids engaged in band. Also, are the teachers going to enjoy using it? Is this something that they're going to be happy with working with? A big one for me, because I'm such an advocate for bands as a performing ensemble, is this something that audiences are going to enjoy listening to? School bands, the audiences aren't a problem because the parents always love what the kids do, but if you have a community band and you're playing for the general public, if you're not playing stuff that people like hearing, they're not going to keep coming back. So obviously, is it good music? I'd love to get the definition of good music. I can't define good music, but I know it when I hear it. So, is this something that fits our catalog? Like Chris said, is this something that's similar to the kinds of products that we're used to producing? And the other thing is, there's so much music that's being published every year and being written every year, and the market is really flooded with a whole lot of product. And we look for stuff that really makes the listener say, wow. There's a lot of pieces we could publish that are okay, but okay isn't good enough in the publishing world. Something's got to be really outstanding for us to want to invest in producing and promoting and making this a part of our catalog. So, if it gets through those steps and we decide it's something we want to publish, we'll reach out to the composer and say, hey, we think this is something we can use. And we'll explain what the deal is, the way the finances work and how they're compensated, and what our editorial process is like. And typically they're very excited and they want to proceed. And, as far as any editorial changes we may suggest, most new composers are so excited to get something published, they'd write music standing on their head if we ask them to. So they're willing to make whatever changes we suggest. So then it goes into production from that point once we sign a contract.
I'll jump on that next. I mean, I think Tyler and Andy and I would share similar, you're going to hear a similar approach across all things. We're always looking for, and I think about composition this way. You can teach people orchestration, you can teach people voicings, you can teach people range, rhythms, and all that. You can't teach them the X factor, the what makes this. You can't teach somebody the melody. You can't teach. So we're looking for that special thing. And you asked earlier about what their compositional process is. Mine starts with fear. I've got nothing. The tank is empty. I'm done. I'm never going to write anything good again. It starts with fear and it just kind of progresses from there. So that's another thing that happens is the fear of the unknown, but also the excitement when you finished it and it's like, oh, wow, that's cool. But yeah, we're looking for that editorial process. So a submission is, getting that content in. Our website has been completely revamped. A lot of hard work from a lot of people. Like everything we do at all of our companies, it's a lot of teamwork. There's a lot of voices. Having this transparency in the submission process, kind of sharing some of the secrets. What do we do? It's not, this is what you do. Go to the submission page, read what's there. Actually, I feel like a lot of people, they click on the submission page and they know how to submit, but they actually don't look at all the information that's available there. You can see, and this is for all of us, I believe, there's a wealth of information that's there to check out that'll help guide you with a lot of the answers to your questions. But yeah, having that information is super helpful. Once we get through, and Andy's right, there's a lot of submissions that come in, and you'd be very surprised how much time each one of those takes. Every one of them will get reviewed, will get listened to, and it's not that it takes 5 hours to evaluate one piece of music. But we've got a lot of things that all of us are doing. It's not just, I think the vision of an editor gives the idea that we just have a red pen and we circle a few things and then we're done. So what do you do the rest of the year? That's a whole nother webinar. What do you do the rest of the year? So this carving out time to do meaningful submissions is very important. I think we all take it really seriously because we are all looking for that needle in the haystack, that X factor, that's something that makes, I like to put it this way for at least in my mind as a little bit of a mantra, looking for the balance between artistry and pedagogy. This should be music that helps students and adult musicians explore their love of music, and it can be teachable, some kind of thing. We look at this music and I think about it in the recording session. I say this to people in the recording session, or I think about this. They're going to look at this piece of music for the 3 minutes they're planning to record it. A student's going to sit there for 8 weeks, 10 weeks with it on their stand. We've got to make sure that it's worth it for the third trombone player to have that on their stand for the next 10 weeks, and for a teacher to be able to discover why this is worth teaching. So that's that pedagogical artistry. We also don't want you just to write like this piece teaches the dotted quarter note. It's only full of dotted quarter notes. So it's a balance to get that. So that's that. The editorial process, that's a whole nother situation. Once a piece is accepted, I don't know about you guys, but I get a little nervous about that first message I send with my first, I'll put it to you this way. The first piece I had accepted came with some suggestions. There were about 80 or 90 of them. So it's a little overwhelming. So I always follow that first one with a phone call, or I precede it with a phone call. But I think the vision from people that submit music is they think they're done. When you have a piece that's accepted, it's literally just started. And there's a collaborative process for most companies that is incredibly exciting. And I learn from every time. That's the big trick, is I learn more from this than they do. We go back and forth and we rip it to shreds and we talk about it and we rework things. And that whole part of the process is super exciting. And at the end of that, you've got almost a new piece. It's but the heart of the content, this goes back to earlier, with what comes in the door needs to be great content. It doesn't have to look pretty. So once you're done with that content, and we've all worked on it together in a collaborative way, everyone feels stronger about it. And everybody feels like, wow, this is just something special. And each composer out there should know that your work, whether it's grade 1, grade half, grade 5, it's treated with the same value and care because it's music and it's connecting people with that music and trying to bring them to the next level. So that's just a very brief part of the editorial process that I'm sure is very common for all of us, at least those of us on this call.
I'll jump
Yeah,
in.
one quick addition to that is that once we decide there's a piece we might want to publish, I kind of feel that composer out with regard to if they're willing to some editorial input. And I'll say to them, hey, we like this piece. It's got some good stuff there. You've got some talent. But, there are some things we think might help this piece a little bit. And we want to explore if you'd be willing to work with us on some of these changes. And again, normally they're so excited about getting published, they'll say yes. But there are a couple times when they don't want to, and that's fine. That's their right. And we just move on from there.
That's actually really exciting to hear that that process is not all that dissimilar from writing a Broadway musical.
I think it's important. I think it's important to understand a couple things when it comes to music editing, and like they were saying, the process of submitting online and having your music show up into essentially a pool of music is kind of similar across all publishing companies. Um, when I did it my first time, similar to Chris, except all of mine got rejected that first time. I wasn't lucky to get mine. So I sent off a huge packet of like 15 pieces, and they sent me a very nice email, which I was surprised to get back, with tons of feedback and all of the reasons why it was no. So I remember going home that weekend being super angry and whatever, because I was about ready just to go and not write music anymore. And so I remember thinking, well, I'll show them. So I went and picked one of the tunes, which was basically, I like the first 5 measures of this piece, and then the rest of it I don't. But here are suggestions on how I think I could like it, which was essentially, the edit. And so I did the work. I re-edited. I sent it back that weekend, and then they called back and they said, "Great, we'll take this one, this one, this one, and this one." And they were just trying to see if I would work with them, because it is a relationship. We are, and I think that's, I've got 2 things to fill in the gaps of all the other good information that was said. And one is that there is nothing that an editor at a publishing company is going to ask you to do to your music that they do not firmly 100% believe is going to either make that piece stronger or help it sell. Nobody wants to hurt the music, because it doesn't benefit us at all. And then as writers, we also know that these are your babies. They're ours too, and so we want them to be good. So that's one. And two, we can only use our own musical sensibilities to pick music. As he was saying, Andy was saying earlier, tell me what good music is. Exactly. We are picking music for a mold, where we have a very set idea of what we're publishing, to who we're publishing. And if your music doesn't fit that, it doesn't mean the music's not good. There's a lot of stuff that comes through that I personally, as a musician, enjoy, that I don't end up publishing, because I don't think that I can take that and market it to middle schools. If that's what the part of this is that I'm dealing with right now, I just don't think I can make, a 45-minute long symphony with 40 kazoos work. I might really think it's cool, but and I think it's important. We use our own musical sensibilities as musicians, and sometimes we're not right. We've all let pieces go that we see show up somewhere else that are like, whoa, that did great, and we just didn't think they were going to do great. It happens. So I think those 2 things are real important. And then I saw someone ask a question, if it's okay if I answer it in the Q&A. It said, Carol mentioned feedback from editors, and I think it's very important. But like they were saying, with hundreds and hundreds of submissions, it becomes a little untenable to give good feedback. However, I would suggest, and they're going to hate me for this, you can always ask again and see if maybe, because you might catch them on a day where they have a minute and they go, yeah, because again, we also all benefited from feedback from editors. So it is important, and sometimes we can get to it and sometimes we can't. So, but yeah, so just keep trying for that, because feedback is important. And I think everybody else answered all the other stuff real good.
I really would like for all of the composers to know that Chris and Tyler are, they're good people. And I think I am too. And, we look for success, and we try to help people, and we try to work with people. And, I got to tell you, I hate sending rejection emails to people, because I know how it hurts. I've been on the other end of that. I know how it feels to get those. And, I'll do those and I'll feel bad for the whole night, because I've wrecked somebody's evening, because I've told them I'm sorry, we're not interested in your music. We're people, we have feelings, but we just can't publish everything that comes into our inbox. And, Tyler is right. I will, if I get a piece from somebody where I think this writer has got some talent, but for whatever reason, this piece won't work for us, I'm going to get in touch with them and say, hey, I think you've got some chops here that, we can work with. And, I want to see what else do you have? Maybe it's something that we could use in the future. So, we're human too. Like Tyler said, sometimes we make mistakes. Chuck Barnhouse turned down Emperata Overture by Claude Smith in 1964. So, sometimes we screw up, and that's just kind of the nature of the business.
I do want to say one thing about that, what Andy's saying, which again, it's a tough message to send. And actually in my little handout, I think that's going to be attached to this too. I actually mentioned the word rejection. I try not to use that word because it's not always rejection. Like Tyler said, I might get something, it just might be like an 18-minute symphony. That's just not our market. It's amazing music. It's fantastic. Or it's something that's just not in our scope right now. So I like, we pass on it, or it's just not the right fit. The other thing that affects that kind of decision making, other than that musical instinct, and yeah, we're teachers and we've been in this market, we're doing our best to try to pick what we think is going to work in the market. But we also have a catalog with limited number, and we also have the geography of that catalog. If we're going to produce 25 pieces, and you're going to put your best sellers in there, and you're going to put some of these things that and you're going to put a couple of holiday selections, and you're going to put a march, you're going to put a fast piece, you're going to put a slow piece. When you start actually putting that on paper, if somebody submits and just with the random submission, well, now we've got 5 pieces that are the fast opener. Now between those 5 similar pieces, well, 3 of them are really darn good. Okay, but we only have space for 1 of them. So then 2 of them, are they really being rejected, or are they just not the right fit? We can't use it. As long as you're not sending that piece to all of us at the same time, go and send it to Tyler. Go send it to Andy. I'm sorry that unfortunately it's just not a fit at this time. Please feel free to shop it around. And I think, I have pieces pretty much in all these catalogs. I have pieces with Wingert Jones and Excelsior now. I have pieces with Barnhouse through Larry Dan. And I love all of those relationships because it is a huge relationship industry. It is business, it's music education, but it's very much relationship. And I value all those. And I have to say, the first time it felt weird, like, oh, I can send this piece to another publisher. Isn't that like, aren't you going to hate me for that? It's like, no, do it. It's great. I mean, it's a small community, and I feel supportive of our competitors. Of course, I want to do better than them, but I like them. We're all good people. But I think when we all do well, we all do well. So a rejection is a tough word to put on something, but also sometimes it's a reflective moment. I've gotten that rejection letter, and I've actually revisited a piece and thought about it, and you think, you know what, they're kind of right. I could have done better with this, or that part that I thought about fixing, I probably should have fixed that. So I guess the big thing to know is that we really do care about the content that's coming in, and we really do take it as personally as you do. So, and I think a lot of the questions I'm seeing over here in the Q&A, a lot of those are on the website, on the submission page. So for sure, check some of those out. And then Felicia, time pending, we'll answer whatever we can with them.
So then let's say we've gotten that piece of music that Jason and Carol wrote. We got it through the publishing process. You've accepted it. You've published this piece. David, what happens next? How do you look for a piece of music? What are you looking for when you're programming your next concert? And does it matter where it's coming from, what it looks like? What all goes into that decision process?
Yeah, well, I take programming probably more seriously than anything else that I do. And I stress about it until the very last minute, all the way until the concert. Have I put the right pieces together? And what I found over the years is I can tell pretty quickly in the first rehearsal or two whether I've chosen music that appeals to the ensemble or not. And I'll often, at this point in my career, if it doesn't land well with them, I will often just change it out immediately, because it doesn't matter how good I am at rehearsing. It doesn't matter how many great jokes I tell. If I've put a piece of music that just doesn't hit for whatever reason, it just doesn't work. And so I think about three groups of people when I'm programming. First is the group, obviously. That's first and foremost. What do they need to develop technically and musically? I also think a lot about the audience, and it doesn't really matter to me what level I'm teaching, from middle school all the way to the Colorado Wind Ensemble. I think the audience needs to take something from that concert as well. And then finally, and I know this sounds a little selfish, but I do think about myself a little bit, and what do I need to grow as a musician and as a teacher? Because I think if I stop growing as a teacher, then my students won't have a good example or a good model. And so I try to think of those three groups, if you will, when I'm choosing music. And hopefully the piece that I choose, or multiple pieces that I choose, will hit two of the three. Every once in a while, I get all three with one piece. It's a piece I'm excited about, the group loves it, and the audience does too. Those are like grand slams. I can't put grand slams on every single program, but I try really hard to get 2 out of 3. And I find that process overwhelming, time consuming, but when I put the time in, it always comes back in spades. So first of all, that's my global 10,000 foot view. And then, after you've looked at scores enough, you can really tell whether they're going to work or not. And I did a program one time that I called Originals, and it was the composer's first work for band. And I put them all together. There were 6 or 7 pieces on one program. And it was like the worst idea I've ever had, because we get better with time, right? We get better as teachers, we get better as composers, we get better over time. And putting somebody's first piece is probably not a great example, right? Of the very best way to do something. And then I put all 6 or 7 of them together. And so it just felt like we were trying to overcome several obstacles that people had written into their pieces. So over time, you start to notice things in scores that are going to work. And of course, these publishers are going through all of these things and editing all of these things so that these pieces work by the time they arrive on my desk.
So then just to follow up, I know that with the Colorado Wind Ensemble, you've created this Inclusive Repertoire Award, and with our audience of, especially for all of our newer, younger composers, I think it's a good opportunity to introduce that. So I'll let you kind of talk to that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Felicia. We're launching it today. Today is our big day. I'm really excited about it. The Inclusive Repertoire Award is designed to support and reward composers from underrepresented communities. It's a piece, hopefully, that's been written within the last 2 years. What comes along with the award is a $1,000 cash prize, as well as a professional recording from the Colorado Wind Ensemble. And we're also inviting that composer to come to campus, paid residency, all expenses and a stipend, to come and work on that piece with the Colorado Wind Ensemble, get it ready to be recorded, work with our composition students. And I think it's just a wonderful opportunity to expand music from underrepresented communities. So I'm really excited about launching that today.
That ties into a couple of people have asked in the Q&A to our publishers, do you require a recording? Is it helpful to have a recording when they submit their music to you?
Depends. Any piano reduction kind of recording that most notation softwares provide is plenty. But for you don't need a live recording or anything like that, at least on our end. And if you don't have one, we've had instances where people just say, I just don't have the ability to do that. I wrote this by hand. And so then we'll just sit down at the piano and use our eyes and ears and inner ears and all that stuff. So at least on our end, no, it's not required. It always helps. So.
Yeah,
go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, we do finale or Sibelius playback. If they have a live recording, that's great. One thing that I caution people about is that sometimes composers will write something using a notation program that's impossible to be played. And so because I'm kind of sarcastic sometimes, I will sometimes write back and say, well, we kind of like this piece, but the synthesized rendition really didn't give us too good of an idea. Can you get a recording of a real band playing this for us so we can make a better judgment? And the answer that I always get back is, well, I can't find a band good enough to play this piece. And so my answer is then, why do I want to publish it if nobody can play it? So anyway, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, following that, I think trying to get a live recording as a composer is probably the best education you can get. Because if you hear a middle school band playing a middle school level piece, you'll get a real reality whether it's something that we would publish. It's not always possible, but there's a lot of the writers, and myself included, when I started, I was teaching band. I had the best ability to, we're going to sight read today. That's the best feedback you can get. So from that perspective, from a composition standpoint, try to get a live recording because it's going to give you a good idea of it. Not always possible. A synthetic recording is good. We can, we have enough experience that we can imagine it. In fact, it took me a long time to switch over to no performer sounds because my old sounds, like I knew in my ear what they sounded like, what it would translate to in an acoustic scenario, because sometimes no performer sounds too good. And then you go and you hear it live and it doesn't match the synthetic, or, like Andy's saying, somebody might write a piece for 8 minutes and the trumpets are playing high A's, B's, and C's without a break for 14 minutes. So it's very deceiving. So I prefer a live recording. It's okay. Some recording is fine. The notation file is good. If there's an instance that it's a manuscript, I would still look at it. You would just have to send it a different way. We'd have to discuss that. But, like I said earlier, I don't want to exclude somebody because of their lack of ability to produce it, electronically. And somebody mentioned a question, should we turn in a rough draft? No, don't turn in a rough draft. You should hone your craft and send it through the ringer as much as possible. Collaborate. Let me tell you this. If you download the handout that I wrote for this, 6 people proofread that for me yesterday. 6 other people checked my grammar. 6 other people changed a few of my sentences to make sure it was clear. Collaboration is key. Share your music with a pal, with a teacher, with a friend, and be open to objective critique.
There is no better way to learn how to write music than to write it and put it in front of a band to have it played. That's the absolute best way. Orchestration books are great, composition lessons are great, but there is no better way to learn than just doing it and hearing it played.
I see a lot of the same question over here, and Chris sort of answered it, but I don't think a lot of people heard him answer it. I see a lot of people asking if publishers specify the type of music that they're looking for on their submissions page. And the answer is yes. It's all over their website. Anything that they have already published is what we're looking for. So, that's the thing that we get, like we were talking about the symphonies, we get all kinds of very interesting sort of experimental type music submitted to us. And that's great. We might like it personally, but what we're looking for is the stuff we're publishing. It's the stuff we've already published. So yes, that answer is easy. Go listen to all the music. Listen to Carol's music. Listen to Chris's music. That's the kind of stuff we're looking for, at least for this.
And I'm sorry, I think it's an important question that somebody asked, and I haven't been able to read all the questions. I'm trying to catch them as I'm going by. But somebody asked about feedback on their music. And I know that we all kind of said different degrees of, like, we try to get feedback in some places. To be honest with you, once in a while I'll get a submission by a 10 or 13-year-old student. I try to get in touch with that student to give them some pointers. But we actually, to really give meaningful feedback for every submission would take weeks and weeks and weeks. So it's not necessarily just a rejection, but think that if you don't get specific feedback on a piece, it's just, I'd rather give you like just the idea, unfortunately, this isn't the right fit. Take it someplace else, it might be the right fit, rather than to just kind of come up with a stock answer for some things that, I'd rather not give specific feedback unless it's meaningful feedback, which we can do on some case-to-case basis. But don't think if you don't get specific feedback that we think your music is garbage. That's, I think, the big issue there.
Alicia, I think we're going to need a part 2 of this webinar on another time to
I was actually thinking the same thing, and I've seen coming through the Q&A, some people have been asking about choral. We do plan on doing a choral follow-up webinar. This one obviously is instrumental, but in the spring, if you keep an eye out on your emails, we plan on doing a follow-up with the same idea, the choral editors, a choral conductor, choral composers. So to those of you asking for choral, I apologize that we don't have time to get into that today. I have seen some questions come through about self-publishing. So I'm curious, I know Carol, you mentioned you've done some self-publishing, and I'm wondering if maybe you can speak to that, not to cut out our publishing editors here, but how does that work?
Yeah. And I've people ask me this kind of thing all the time, because some things I still do self-publish. Every time I write something, when I first write it, technically it's self-published under mine. But then often I know that I'm going to go ahead, and if there's an opening, somewhere, like if there's a need with a publisher, hey, we need another grade 2 or something. I kind of had to make that decision. I made it a few years ago that I just saw a lot of benefit in go ahead and giving mine to other publishers. One of the biggest benefits is that they promote your music so well. And so I think when I was starting out, really, again, the marching thing took care of itself because it was being performed, and that just was a different animal. But with concert, I just, I realized it was going to be hard for people to come discover me and discover my little website and things like that. But when the publishers get it out there, and then, if you're lucky enough to get something on a state list, wow, then it sells like 10,000 times more. I just, and so the other thing for me now, because I write 12 months a year, is time is so valuable to me. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time standing in front of a copy machine. I don't want to invest in one of those big, huge things. So each time when I get orders, I got to go print it, ship it. I'm a one-man show here, And so that, to me, having some stuff with other publishers, they're doing all that, and they do it so professionally. It looks so good, but they're really going and trying to promote your stuff everywhere. So people learned about me, I feel pretty sure, because of them. So I'm very grateful to that. But there's always that balance, and people have to decide that for themselves, because you don't make as much money off of each piece. So that's the other thing you have to know. You get a certain royalty. The other thing that publishers taught me, though, is, hey, when you're self-publishing, you think you're going to keep 100% of the proceeds. But this is, they educated me, but music stores expect a dealer discount. So that's coming off. Again, cost of printing is expensive. And then shipping it, you can pass the shipping on to your customer and stuff. Again, time, but it's really, you're not making 100% royalty, even if you, so again, you just have to kind of weigh those options. But that's a great whole set of questions right there.
I just wanted to jump in, not on the self-publishing part of it, because everything Carol said is perfect about that. But there's a general question. One of the things that people might not realize when your piece is accepted, you actually are turning over the copyright of your piece to the publisher. So I don't own the copyright to my pieces. Alfred or Barnhouse owns my copyright for the pieces. And I think that's something that sometimes might be a little shocking for a composer to learn. There are some times when that's not the case, but I'd say that the vast majority that's kind of the first conversation. And it's a little bit scary for people to think like, wait a minute, but this is my property. Yes, but when you give that copyright up control, you're getting a ton of stuff in return. We're really taking care of your music. It's getting marketed. It's getting put here. It's getting put there. There's licensing involved. There's third-party licensing that can happen with all that kind of stuff, and that kind of control. But it is a little bit nerve-wracking for a new composer to just kind of get that message of like, wait, this isn't mine anymore. But I just want to make sure everybody understands that is an important part of this too.
We are coming up on the end of the hour, and there's so much information. I know that obviously we've just barely scratched the surface of it. There's questions like crazy in the Q&A. Chris and I were talking yesterday that this probably will get a follow-up blog post, and we'll try and answer a lot more of those questions. Like I said, I'll send everyone the recording of this in probably middle of next week, so that we can get you this information along with resources that all of our presenters have shared. Before I let everyone go, though, I want to do just one final closing question, and we'll go in kind of the reverse order we went for the first question. So for everyone on the panel, coming with your perspective, whether it's as a conductor, a composer, or a publisher, if you could leave your audience today with one piece of advice that they can take into their journey to get their music published or out into a wider audience, whether they're publishing for the first time or for the last time, hopefully not the last time, what would that advice be? So David, we'll start with you.
Well, for me, I have to choose music that I'm in love with, and the group knows it if I'm not. And so I always, always have to find music that I personally find value in. And when I do that, the group comes alive.
Jason?
I guess I would say, present something that's as professional as possible. You know what I mean? And sometimes that has to do with how you're using Finale or Sibelius or whatever you're using. But a lot of times that has to do with just knowing the rules of music notation, basic stuff like that. I mean, if you get it right, if your dynamics are in the right place, if your slurs are correct, if everything about it is correct, if the way that you're using the instruments is correct, I think that immediately has a puts a good impression towards the people that you're submitting it to, and that makes a big difference. If it looks professional, then I think you're a step ahead.
Carol?
Yeah, and kind of going along with that, just aside from how it looks and professional and everything, but the content, if you're trying to get into this market, really learn what this market is. Really do your homework. Talk to band directors. Luckily, that's all my friends because I was a band director. So I taught it. So I knew what sixth graders should be trying to do at this level and now in high school and so on. But if you don't know, go to some rehearsals. But really talk to them and understand, learn about ranges and what really works, because educationally, directors are not going to want to buy something if then they're going to be struggling, or this doesn't work for my kids because they can't do this as second year players and so on. So just learn what the market is and learn your craft. And from feedback from publishers, if they've given you feedback, really learn from that feedback.
Andy?
I would just really urge all composers to be brutally honest with yourself about your music. And when you're writing a piece of music, don't rely on criticism from your spouse or your mother or, your friends, because they're going to say, oh, this is really cool, you should get this published. Your students are actually going to be a little more candid than your friends and your family are going to be. But, really take a cold, hard look at yourself and your music and ask yourself, okay, if I try to get this published, what's so special about my music that somebody would want to buy this over this piece by Randall Standridge, or Robert Smith, or Jim Swearingen, or anybody else? And you really got to look at yourself and your music from a very, very objective kind of place, which is hard to do when you're a composer, because it's your baby. You've created this, and so you've just really got to try to be as honest and as realistic as you can with yourself, and evaluate yourself as candidly as you possibly can. But if you think you've got what it takes, persevere. If you get turned down by a publisher, keep going. Keep trying with that publisher or other publishers and see if you can make a go of it. Don't give up.
Chris?
I think I'm one of the lucky ones that has a very honest wife. So she'll yell at me from the other room, how many times are you going to end that piece? It ended like 3 times already. Or I think the other day she told me, you did 2 measures and then the next 2 measures did the same thing. Can you just do something different, for crying out loud? So I 100% agree with being able, and I'm not always good at it, to be honest with you. You have to separate yourself from the piece. It's not a personal attack if the ending is too long, or if this phrase just doesn't cut it. This 6.5 measure phrase is just too weird. And if somebody points that out, it's not a personal attack, but you have to be able to step away from it. Part of my writing process that I've learned is, when I'm done writing a piece, or when I think I'm done, is to actually step away from it for a few days and then maybe listen to it again. So that objective review, whether it's personally, through friends, trusted, and newbies, new people that don't know you, that aren't going to just tell you, oh, it's lovely, this is the best ever, is really important. Being resilient and being true to your voice is important, I didn't start to write music to get published. I wrote music because I was teaching concepts to my students. I happened to be lucky and go down another road. So I sometimes had to remind myself of that, like, oh, I got a rejection letter. I stink. That, you know, that self-doubt always creeps in because it's always there. I'm terrible. I should just quit and never do it again. And then, you know, I was reminded again by my wife, like, hey, you didn't get into this to be published. You got into this because you enjoy the process and you enjoy connecting kids with music. So staying true to what you're starting out with. And that's it.
And Tyler, last but not least.
I think sort of on the same line as Chris, maybe not from an educational standpoint, but I think if everyone who writes music remembers why you write music because you enjoy writing music, and it shouldn't matter if it gets published or not. If you don't enjoy writing music, then that's your answer. So because I have lots of people always ask, what do I have to write to get this published? And my answer is, I don't know. First you got to write something you like, and then you got to have fun doing it. And if not, then, you know, what's the point? And I think that's important. I think anybody here who writes music, you all absolutely love it. You live for it, you breathe it. That's why we do it. And so if we can tell as editors that you are passionate and love what you're doing, then that's the biggest hurdle, I think, too. If you're just trying to write music to make money and fit the mold that we're looking for, chances are it's always going to feel like that when it comes in. It's going to feel like it's in a mold. So anyway, I'm happy I got to close out.
Thank you all so much. To everyone in our audience, thank you for joining us today. I will stick around for a couple minutes just to continue put a couple of links in the Q&A and in the chat. We will follow this up middle of next week with the replay video and the resources that our presenters have shared. Presenters, thank you all for your time and your knowledge and your expertise today. We really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you at the next webinar.